Welcome to Guardian Radio 96.9 FM Sunday, broadcasting from Nassau, Bahamas, and streaming live on GuardianTalkRadio.com, the country's news talk radio station with fresh news and smart talk all day. Our Sunday lineup begins with The Political Review with Quincy Parker, live at 4 p.m. That's followed by Let's Talk Together in English with Lady T, live at 6 p.m. Next comes the Sunday edition of Voices of the Diaspora with Robert Dudonné, live at 7 p.m. Followed by Caribbean and Urban American Gospel Hits with Landlord and Mike D at 8 p.m. That's all straight ahead, beginning with The Political Review, next, here on Guardian Radio 96.9 Sunday.
The views and opinions of the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the position of the management and staff of Guardian Network.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Political Review. My name is Quincy Parker, and I am your host on this lovely Sunday afternoon. It's rainy in some spots, but the sun in my neck of the woods. And I'd like to open today's show by saying a special congratulations to the graduating class of Queens College, the class of 2022. My daughter Maya was among that graduating class, and I'd like to congratulate Maya and all of her classmates, as well as all of the parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and guardians and cousins and grandparents who worked so hard to ensure that those children successfully completed their high school educations, and we look forward to incredible new things coming out of this class. They're going to be incredible people who take our country forward in wonderful ways. And congratulations to all of you, and to Maya, Camille, my darling daughter. You are the absolute bomb.com. So this week in the wonderful neighbor to the north, United States of America, the United States Supreme Court, having indicated an intention to do so earlier this year, finally delivered a ruling striking down the Roe versus Wade ruling, which protected or gave women the right to self-determination regarding the sexual and reproductive health. It's commonly called the abortion law, and that is one of the major consequences of the legislation. And the choice by the U.S. Supreme Court to strike down Roe versus Wade is a perfect example of how politics plays a role in determining quality of life, personal freedom and choice in a democracy, because the Supreme Court, made up of 9 justices, 6 of whom are definitively conservative judges with anti-abortion views, the Supreme Court was not in a position prior to the Trump presidency to strike down this important law that gave protection to women in the United States. And the choice of judges, the president gets to recommend judges to the Supreme Court when spaces open up. Those choices follow ideological structures, so to speak. And so a conservative or an ultra-conservative president nominating conservative or ultra-conservative judges changes the balance of the court to such an extent now that it's a more or less 2-to-1 majority for the conservative point of view on the Supreme Court. Whereas if you look into the American public and you follow public polls, the last one that I saw from Politico showed the majority of Americans Roe versus Wade law. But the Supreme Court, which is supposed to make law that reflects the culture in which they live, went against the majority view based on the ideology of the court or the ideology of the majority of the court members. And that's the danger of the outright politicization of things like the courts, law enforcement, and similar things, is that what you end up risking is not simply winning a court nominee and sticking a feather in your cap as the president of the United States, but you've changed the composition of the court and in a way changed the way Americans get to live their lives on the striking down of this seminal ruling. And I talked about the Roe versus Wade ruling on this show a couple of weeks ago when the Supreme Court's memo got leaked. The memo written by Samuel Alito that indicated the court's intention to strike this law down. Today, we're going to talk with a rights activist, Bahamian rights activist, whose views on this, I think, would be instructive. And one of the things that I want to do is to examine this thing and other things like it from the perspective of not only what sort of a precedent it sets for other democracies around the world, but what sort of lessons we in the Bahamas can learn from this ruling in the United States, if any. But before I welcome our guest, I think it would be, I want to read something written and posted yesterday by former First Lady of the U.S., Michelle Obama. She put out her thoughts on the ruling on Twitter, and I want to read it for you now in case you hadn't had a chance to look at it. And Michelle Obama said, and I'm going to quote her statement here: "I am heartbroken for people around this country, this is the U.S., who just lost a fundamental right to make informed decisions about their own bodies. I am heartbroken that we may now be destined to learn the painful lessons of a time before Roe was made law of the land, a time when women risked losing their lives to legal abortions, a time when the government denied women control over their reproductive functions, forced them to move forward with pregnancies they didn't want, and then abandoned them once their babies were born. That is what our mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers lived through, and now here we are again. So yes, I am heartbroken for the teenage girl full of zest and promise who won't be able to finish high school or live the life she wants because her state controls her reproductive decisions. For the mother of a non-viable pregnancy who is now forced to bring that pregnancy to term. For the parents watching their child's future evaporate before their very eyes. For the healthcare workers who can no longer help them without risking jail time. When we don't understand our history, we are doomed to repeat its mistakes. In the US, our futures are tied together in a delicate tapestry that we have each had a hand in making. Too often, cynicism or indifference makes us feel like we don't have a say in weaving it. But that couldn't be further from the truth. The more we allow pessimism to push us further into helplessness, the less we will be empowered to help create the kind of country we want to live in. This horrifying decision will have devastating consequences, and it must be a wake-up call, especially to the young people who will bear its burden. I know this is not the future you chose for your generation, but if you give up now, you will inherit a country that does not resemble you or any of the values you believe in. This moment is difficult, but our story does not end here. It may not feel like we are able to do much right now, but we can and we must. If you're like me and you want to get started right now, I encourage you to channel your frustration and anger into getting involved. Organizations like Planned Parenthood, the United States, among many others, have resources you can look up to, or you can look to if you want to help others, or if you need help yourself. Our hearts are broken today, but tomorrow we've got to get up and find the courage to keep working towards creating the more just America we all deserve. We have so much left to push for, to rally for, to speak for, and I know we can do this together. End of quote. From Equality Bahamas, joining us today is Alicia Wallace. Alicia, welcome back to the Political Review.
Hello, thank you for having me again.
So you heard the former First Lady's statement, and before we ask any policy questions, I just want to get your views on, first of all, the ruling itself, and second of all, what did you think about what Michelle Obama said?
The first thing about the ruling is that it was predicted, right? Like that it was coming, and there wasn't a whole lot of action to prevent it. And I think there might have been a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness around it, because you're sort of resigned to these people doing what they want to do rather than following not even the will of the people, but what human rights and a commitment to human rights would require. And now that it's been made, I think there's just widespread devastation across the US and all over the world, because people are recognizing that this wave of conservatism is continuing from, however many years ago, a few years ago now. And we recognize that what happens in the US does affect many other countries, including ours, and gives people certain kinds of talking points and pushes politicians in certain directions. So I think there's a lot of fear about what it means for everyone else and how it might impact the little bit of progress that has been made to date.
And the former first lady's comments were framed in a way that spoke to heartbreak and almost a sense of fatalism.
It does, and it's the way that a lot of people feel. I've spoken to quite a few friends over the past couple of days about it, and people are sort of between devastation and heartbreak and trying to figure out how to do the next thing. And sometimes you just need to take a minute to acknowledge how awful you feel, and before you can actually move forward with any kind of real purpose and strategy. So I think people are trying to work their way out of that feeling of just rage, heartbreak, confusion, and trying to figure out how to organize. So there's a lot of interim organizing. So what do we do right now if we're located in the US? So I'm seeing a lot of people. I live in a state where you can still access abortion. If you need help, let me know. If you need somewhere to stay, I have an extra room. People are doing that kind of a mutual aid thing going on. And then there are some people that are looking toward the future. How do we ensure that states are protecting our rights? How do we ensure that there aren't rollbacks in states where there's actually legality and there's access? So there are multiple levels. There's the short term, medium term, and the long term to look at just in the US alone. And then it gets even more complicated for other countries that tend to follow the lead of the states.
So we are not America. This is something that I get a lot when I talk about things that are happening in the American political system or the American government system or just in American culture. And yes, I completely get that we are not America. But let me ask you, as a Bahamian and a Bahamian woman, two separate things, to be clear. Do you think that we should care about the American Supreme Court striking down Roe versus Wade? And if so, why should we care? And if not, why not?
I don't think we have much choice in caring. If you care about rights, if you care about democracy, if you care about the way that we progress as a nation, you can't avoid paying attention to what's happening all over the world, and not the least of which being the US, that's a very close neighbor, and not just a neighbor geographically, but one that basically dominates the media, dominates everything that we watch, that we listen to, music, and what happens politically is represented very well in the music that we listen to and the television shows that we watch. As you see more TV series taking political and social stances and understanding the way that politics work in the Bahamas. I think we like to operate completely independently, and people just, ideas just fall into our heads, but we are influenced by what's happening in the US. And we know that people get their talking points from what they hear on various news stations coming from the States, what they hear from politicians. And a lot of people see the US, as many other people might see Canada or the UK, as sort of models, as beacons that we can just follow. Well, the US didn't do it, why should we have to do it? Or Canada did it, so we should do it too. These comparisons happen. It's normal. It's not strange that we do it in the Bahamas. Many other countries do the same thing. We have to be paying attention. We have to learn from the mistakes that are made in other countries. We can look at the successes and let that guide us. There's no divorcing ourselves from the rest of the world. We don't just exist in a bubble.
But what I hear, I take your point, but what I am told often in this and other is that whatever America has to do regarding something like abortion is what happens in America. In the Bahamas, abortion is not an issue. That's what I hear. And we both know that that's not entirely true. There may not be a legal basis for it, but we know that it happens. And so I press the issue. I want to press you on this seemingly willful and selective kind of insularity that we have about certain things when it comes to our stance as a member of the community of nations.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a superiority thing. And also not like them so much that we will ignore all the similarities. Like you said, people will say that abortion is not an issue in the Bahamas. People will say that it is illegal, which isn't 100% true. You can access abortion legally in a particular set of circumstances. But not at will, not just because you want an abortion or for any reason, as is the case in 2 other countries in the region. And I think if we admit that we have some of the same issues as other countries, if we are, sharing just the truth that people are sexual and people are engaging in sexual activity under a number of different circumstances. If we admit that, then we would have to admit that, yes, people should have access to contraceptives, and that should exist regardless of ability to pay for contraceptives. Yes, people plan their families. People should be able to decide if they want to have children, when they want to have children, and how many they want to have. Yes, people should be able to say, I don't want to have a child. Right now, I am pregnant and I do not want to be, and I want to end that. So, to avoid even thinking about it, it's like it's a willful ignorance, really. That's the best way that I can describe it.
But what do you think that there is a danger to said ignorance, or is that just the way it is?
No, it's absolutely dangerous, and it's keeping us back. It's keeping us from making progress because we don't want to look in the mirror. And I think the ideas that people have about abortion in general are tied to a negative attitude towards sex. And it requires us to deal with that to actually get at some of these issues. So a few weeks ago, the big story in the news was about this teenager who was pregnant. And it was by a man well above her age. I think she's 14. And people were saying, well, why was she with him? She was bad. Well, she's pregnant now. She has to face the consequences. So the idea is that being pregnant, having a child, having to raise a child is a consequence for being a sexual person, engaging in sexual activity when people don't deem you worthy. That's one thing if you are of age. But even in the case of minors, it's a refusal to acknowledge that minors are taken advantage of and are not able to legally give consent, and punishing them for being sexually violated. So we have an issue when it comes to sex in general in the country. And I think that's at the root of all of this, all of the conversations that we're having about sexual and reproductive health and rights. It's the thing that's forward and doing what we need to do to ensure that people are able to self-determine.
There is there's a question about urgency, right? And priority. Given that the country is still dealing with the aftermath of Dorian, and in some parts still dealing with Isaias, still dealing with Joaquin for the countries in the southern Bahamas, still dealing with Michael. Even the natural disasters have wreaked havoc on not just the economy, but on populations, on families and community development, on public health. And then on top of that, you have the COVID-19 pandemic, which has completely wrecked, which did completely wreck our tourism sector for 2 solid years. And now that there is a sense of, well, we just have to live with COVID, we still are trying to determine what that means, what that looks like. And now the government has brought its budget forward for the next fiscal year. And the priorities in that budget, or the priorities surrounding that budget, ought to be things like quality of life, help sustain gas prices, dealing with food security, given the challenges caused by both supply chain and the war in Ukraine. So there's a question that arises when we consider things like this about whether this is important enough to be talking about it now, whether this is important enough for us to get ourselves engaged in this discussion right now, or should we shelve this issue and deal with what is more exigent, so to speak. And so my question to you is, you're a person who's engaged in trying to help foster some kind of social engineering that would allow for everyone's life that they can have in this country. Is this issue something that we as a country should really pay attention to now? Or is this something that could go to the back burner?
This is definitely something that we need to pay attention to now. It's actually overdue. And I don't subscribe to the idea that we can only deal with one thing at a time or 2 things at a time. Because I don't think we have that luxury. And it's I guess it's why we have so many actors involved. It's why we have, almost 40 members of parliament. We have a number of ministers with responsibility for various different ministries. We even have ministers of state there with their own portfolios. There are directors within departments. And what are these people doing if they're not addressing these issues? And none of them are standalone. None of them can be addressed in isolation. They're all overlapping. They're all intertwined. So, for example, you mentioned COVID-19 and the aftermath of disaster like Hurricane Dorian. Even those 2 issues, we can no longer treat them as separate, because there are people who were displaced by Hurricane Dorian and maybe were just starting to get on their feet, or maybe not even there yet. And here comes COVID-19 that shut businesses, laid people off, made it even more difficult for people to find jobs where they needed to, made it more difficult for people to be able to earn money, much less does that mean for them. And then if we add into the equation that they have children that they have to take care of, let's say that they have a child with a disability, that's 2 more issues. We have to talk about education, we have to talk about disability, added on to the climate crisis and access to healthcare. Nothing stands alone. And then you add to that person's plate now that they have an unwanted pregnancy. Abortion is in the picture. We can't separate these issues. We have to be dealing with them at the same time, and they need to be dealt with in the Ministry of Health, in the Ministry of Social Services, and in particular, Department of Gender and Family Affairs. They need to be dealt with at the Department for Environmental Protection. You know, it's all interlinked. We can't avoid it.
So you have, boy, you named an agency just now, the Department of Gender and Family Affairs, that has its own history and its own challenges. And maybe I guess we'll get there in this discussion. But I guess I just want us to be as thorough as possible. Is it your view, given everything that we've discussed, that we should take this moment as a country to discuss legalization of abortion?
Yes, I think it's, like I said, it's long overdue. It is an issue that Equality Bahamas has been looking at internally, and kind of strategizing, figuring out how to address this, knowing that leaves people riled up, and in particular, religious fundamentalists, which is always a challenge.
Yeah. So let's say we have this moment and we're looking at our neighbors to the north and we see an upheaval that is definitely on the horizon based on this ruling. For instance, I mean, when you look at what the fallout is gonna be, I mean, for instance, black women are definitely going to be the ones who are most impacted by the ban on abortion. It is going to disproportionately affect poor young women as well. It's going to drive the practice of abortions underground, or it may drive the practice of abortions underground and increase the health risks of people who are engaged in seeking an abortion. It's going to be a more polarized political and social atmosphere because of the decision to strike down Roe versus Wade. People who are looking for abortions are going to circumvent the new laws. So you're risking criminalizing people who are seeking to access this service or these services. So there's definitely going to be a social cost to this decision, and I want to know if it is our time now to look at them and say, well, that's an argument that we need to have, and we need to have it now. Let's legalize abortion and protect the health of once and for all.
Yep, definitely. I think that we can be observing the conversation that's happening and the arguments that are being put forward from different sides. Those who, and it's not two, there aren't just two sides. There are people who in the US say, no to abortion except, and usually it's to preserve the life of the mother. And some people feel like that's not a good enough reason. So there are a lot of different perspectives on this issue. And we can definitely benefit from, before we launch campaigns or anything like that, to pay attention to what is being said and the arguments that are being brought and the responses to those arguments, and being able to properly strategize And obviously not just taking these arguments and copy pasting, but recognizing that we have a slightly different context. We're experiencing the same issues, but in a completely different context, set of beliefs or beliefs that manifest in different ways. And we have much to learn from our Caribbean neighbors as well. Jamaica has been having this conversation for the past few years, pushing for decriminalization of abortion. I think it was brought up by a member of parliament, and the NGOs were paying attention and they haven't forgotten, and they are continuing that conversation. And of course, we can look at the laws in Barbados and Guyana and speak to the people who were instrumental in getting abortion decriminalized in those countries as well, and figuring out how we can do it here, see if anyone has done it with an incremental approach, which is usually not a very good idea. Something like this, it would be interesting to see who has done it and if it has worked. And then, of course, there are countries outside of the region like Poland that recently had some success, Argentina, and a couple of other countries in Latin America.
I don't want to be an alarmist, and I don't want to unfairly or an argument. So I'm just gonna put it out there that there is. It strikes me that we have an opportunity here for a national discussion that is perhaps going to be politically unpopular. And as a result of that political unpopularity, the likelihood is we're going to miss this moment to have this national discussion. What is Equality Bahamas prepared to do to make sure that we don't miss this moment? I mean that's I don't want that question to paint you into a corner or anything like that, but I just want to ask.
Yeah. Well, we're always prepared to have conversations that are challenging. I think we've consistently done that over the past 8 years in existence. Right now, we are quite focused on getting marital rape criminalized. And we've actually been having some discussions about this broader area of sexual and reproductive health and rights, and what it means or what it would take to change the culture around sex and sexuality, and recognizing that there are probably ways that we can come up with to talk about these issues in tandem, because they're not so different. What's at the root of them, like I mentioned earlier, is of course sex negativity, as well as the ideas that people have about women, the stereotypes, and what people perceive to be the quote unquote role of women and of men, and who gets to make decisions about women's bodies. And one of the things that you've definitely seen from activists, from women's rights groups in the US, is that they are saying that it's consistently men in the Supreme Court about women's bodies. And we don't have that much of a different situation here, given that we have such low representation of women within our own government. And of course, we have to recognize that even the representation that we do have, we don't really know where those women stand. Every woman isn't going to support the rights of other women or the rights of all women. Many times it's quite selective. It's about women in the same socioeconomic class. It's women of the same religion, women who went to school with me, who dress like me, who look like me. But we need representation by women who actually believe in the humanity, believe in the rights, and are prepared to defend the rights of all women in all of our diversity. So we're also looking at Equality Bahamas at what we can do to improve leadership, improve women's representation. And that doesn't just mean numbers, that means quality, that means a focus on feminist leadership. And that brings me to the session that we had maybe a week and a half ago, 2 weeks actually, with Gaynell Curry, Article 4, which is on temporary special measures, and talking about political quotas and why they're important and how they can be implemented. And that's part of a larger series where we're looking at the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, also known as CEDAW, and the commitments that the Bahamas has already made to protect women from discrimination, but also to expand women's rights. And the CEDAW committee has made recommendations on various issues, including women's sexual and reproductive health and rights, and including very specifically abortion and treating abortion as a form of healthcare. So that's a really long way of saying that we're looking at this in a very holistic way. We're looking at the commitments that the Bahamas has made and how we can hold the state accountable to the commitments that it makes in international spaces, because often they don't come back here and tell us about those commitments, and they definitely don't come back and domesticate based on those commitments right away or even over a long period of time. We're about to celebrate 30 years of the ratification of CEDAW, or maybe not celebrate it, but recognize the 30-year anniversary in October of 2023. And we're not even close to being in alignment or in compliance with the convention. So we're starting there. We're starting with the commitments that have already been made and looking at the laws that we have now and being in dialogue with the government about that, while having conversations at the national level with the people, recognizing that we have to be able to build political will. And that means having really difficult conversations. It's not going to be fun. We might not make a lot of friends in the process, but we have to do it, if only to hear the arguments and be able to strengthen.
I feel like that's an entirely reasonable position, but why does it seem that is difficult to achieve, despite how reasonable it seems?
We have the people who make the decisions supposedly on our behalf. They make decisions generally not in our best interest, but in the interest of their parties and their own re-election. These people, they get in, they like it, they decide they want to stay there, and their commitment is to themselves and to the longevity of their political careers, rather than actually moving things forward, making progress, meeting the commitments that have been made by administration after administration. And that's why it comes down to political will. We can have dialogue with the government all we want, and they can agree with us behind closed doors, or maybe they might even tell us behind closed doors, yeah, I know we made that commitment, that would be great, but we can't do that, right? We have an election to win. So we have to be talking as a people and demonstrate to our representatives that this is what we want, this is what we need. And it should not be the case that we have to make something popular or get lots of people to agree, because human rights should never be to some sort of majority vote or to the whims of random people. But we have bought into so many harmful ideas, violence against women in various forms, including structural violence, like these terrible laws have become so normalized. They're seen as the standard now, and anything outside of that seems like too much, seems like it's unnecessary, or we're going against some great law, and then it becomes a religious issue where we want to govern based on, particular religious text, and start looking at the preamble of the Constitution and trying to convince people that what is it that reference to Christian values means that we're a theocracy, which I would like to say we all know we're not, but we don't all know that. So there's some work to do on that level as well in terms of civic education. I mean, there's just so much to do, Quincy, at so many different levels that you have an issue and you want to address this issue, but you can never do it by just talking about that issue. You always have to dig a little bit deeper and get to the root, and you have to do even more widespread work on very general things like the Constitution and what it is and how the Constitution relates to legislation before you can ever get to having a real conversation about why women should have the right to pass on citizenship to their children. It can never be a conversation just about the issue, because we failed in huge ways in education and in engaging one another in these kinds of conversations.
So this week you are in Rwanda.
Yes, I am.
This week in Rwanda, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting took place in Kigali, and there were, I guess, leaders from all over the Commonwealth that traveled to Kigali to talk about common values and agree on actions and policies to improve the lives of people within the Commonwealth. And the theme of this year's CHOGM was delivering a common future, connecting, innovating, and transforming. And one of the things it talks about is this theme, and I'm going to quote here from the Commonwealth's website, where they talk about the theme, talking about innovating, connecting, and transforming to help achieve some of the Commonwealth's biggest goals, like protecting natural resources and boosting trade. And you were present at the at this meeting in what context? I know you spoke and attended the Commonwealth Women's Forum, the Commonwealth People's Forum, and also, if I recall, the roundtable with foreign ministers. We'll ask about each of those individually, but why don't you give us sort of an overview, I guess, of what you think the outcomes of CHOGM 2022 in Kigali would be?
Well, I was a part of the Commonwealth Equality Network, or TSEN, delegation, where some of us attended the youth forum, those who still fit into the youth category, and the rest of us.
Hey, why? I feel like you're throwing shade at somebody now.
I'm throwing shade at myself. Because I no longer fit in that category.
What?
By Commonwealth standards, no.
No way. That can't possibly be true.
I know, it's painful. Now I'm in this weird place where I'm not youth and I'm also not a senior citizen.
Oh my God. But Alicia, you're so young. How is it possible that they don't consider you youth?
I don't know, but I'm going to write a letter in protest.
Please.
So I missed out on the youth forum, which I heard was great. Everyone who attended said it was incredible, really well attended. And of course, the voice of young people was heard loud and clear. The rest of us attended the Women's Forum and the People's Forum. And I was also fortunate to be invited by the Commonwealth Foundation to speak on the closing panel of the People's Forum that really was bringing together all of the conversations and all of the points that were made over the course of 2 days and distilling it and figuring out how we move forward and how do we create the Commonwealth of the future that the people at the People's Forum said that they want and that they're prepared to contribute to building. So that was quite interesting, sitting in those sessions for 2 days. And the People's Forum was particularly focused on health and climate. And that, of course, is an important topic. It's one that's critical, particularly for small island developing states or big ocean states. But it was really great to themselves, and their design made connections between health and climate. So it wasn't just like this session is talking about climate and this session is talking about health, but they made some connections. And there was one that also focused on financing for climate action and moving forward in the provision of universal access to healthcare. So those were fascinating sessions. And then, like I said, I only attended one day of the Women's Forum because the Women's Forum and the People's Forum overlapped.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So in the leader's statement issued on the 25th, that would have been yesterday, and it's still in draft form, but the leaders talked about having affirmed, for instance, or having recognized the effects of global insecurity in food, energy, and climate, and agreed to strengthen Commonwealth Secretariat to further focus on those issues and take forward action in support of Commonwealth members. That's great language. But then the next paragraph says, and I'm going to quote it here, we reaffirm that radicalization leading to violence, violent extremism, and terrorism in all its forms are serious global threats. We expressed concern for victims, condemned perpetrators, and recommitted to the intensification of efforts to foster greater harmony and peace in order to counter violent extremism. And then they also talked about the Commonwealth call to action on living lands, the Declaration on Sustainable Urbanization, which I want to read, on childcare and protection reform. So there seems to be a focus on, well, not focus, but a recognition of a broad sort of spectrum of some of the challenges facing Commonwealth countries. But when it comes down to, when it comes down to dealing with things like land reform, which is an issue in the Bahamas, obviously, and violence, there is a recognition that more needs to be done from a policy point of view as well. And there was a comment in the Commonwealth Statement on Living Lands Charter that I wanted to talk to you about, where it says that we acknowledge that unsustainable land use combined with increasing climate extremes has a direct impact on the destruction and degradation of soils, forests, and biodiversity in many countries, and poses a high risk to land-related natural disasters and extreme depletion and contamination of groundwater resources. And this next part is the part I want to get to, which affects the health of millions of people, particularly the most vulnerable groups, including women and children, including increases in environmentally induced migration. When you consider the state of affairs in the Bahamas and the things that we are trying to wrestle with in terms of how do we deal with things like land reform in order to facilitate sustainable development of our natural resources and those sorts of things. How do those kinds of considerations relate to the concerns that you as Equality Bahamas would be championing, so to speak, in both the international arena and here at home. Because as you say, that drawing the connections between healthcare and the climate issues and some of the economic issues is important. And I think that occasionally we think that the argument, not occasionally, I guess what I mean is it would be better to say by and large, we seem to think that the argument for equality is a separate and isolated issue and doesn't have anything to do with some of these other pressing issues that are often consideration in forums like CHOGM. So is there a connection that you can that you can identify, or that the CHOGM meeting identified between equality and these other things?
Yeah, so we not in terms of land. I don't think there were any conversations about land or land reform, but connecting equality to these issues most definitely. One of the things that I found really interesting at both the Women's Forum and the People's Forum was that there was a very vocal group of people representing older persons, and they were consistently making comments and saying, no one's talking about us. We are a group that is at risk for various different things. We are one of the most at risk when it comes to climate disaster. It's difficult for us to get to a safe place. If we need rescue, if we need to, get out of a situation, it's harder for us to do it on our own. Aging often comes with disability of some form. Why aren't we talking about this? Why aren't older people brought up? You focus on the youth, that's great. But the one thing that's going to happen to the youth that we know for sure is that they're going to get older. So it was really, really interesting to hear from that group and for them to themselves and take up space consistently to remind people that they exist because they're invisible in so many countries and in so many communities. And it's easy to forget that they're having different experiences and they're experiencing a specific set of threats and have access to far less opportunities. The same is true about women. Women are affected in particular ways by lack of access to healthcare, by climate disaster. We saw that with Hurricane Dorian. Equality Bahamas saw it for sure when we were running the Hurricane Relief Center in collaboration with Lend-A-Hand Bahamas. I would say, no exaggeration, probably 97% of the people who came in for assistance were women. And not because only women needed help, but because women were responsible for getting the help that everyone needed in the household. So the men, the women, and the children. Women were the ones who had all of the information about everyone's dietary needs, everyone's sizes. So that the mental burden, the emotional burden, all on women. It was women who were coming in and saying, there's no one who's helping with contraception. How can we get some assistance with this? Because funny enough, we've been displaced, but we haven't stopped having sex, so can you help me? Because we can't have children under these circumstances.
Yeah.
So it's.
I'm sorry. Let me ask you to pause there. Let's take it's 5:00 and you're listening to the Political Review. My name is Quincy Parker. I'm your host, and today we're talking with Alicia Wallace from Equality Bahamas. She is talking to us from Kigali, Rwanda, where she attended some sessions of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings. And we'll hear more about her time in Rwanda and get more of her thoughts on a number of other issues when we come back on the Political Review. We'll be right back. Please come back and join us.
How important collecting your money can be to the success of your business. Start your relationship with Fidelity today so that we can show you the many options available to you with our merchant services. From click and pay options online to merchant terminals and e-commerce options. We're here to help your business succeed. For more details, speak to one of our business development officers at 356-7764 in Nassau or 352-6676 in Freeport. Visit our website at fidelitygroup.com or visit any of our branches.
We're good for you.
Frank, what you doing?
Looking at some new insurance options, Uncle Joe.
Insurance? You should have asked me. I've got a guy on Collins Avenue who does my motor insurance. My home policy is through a lady I work with. Now, Johnny from the gym, he's going to hook me up with medical and life. Now, for pensions, I'd like to spread that one around a little.
Or I could call CG Atlantic. They do all of that.
With all the insurance and pensions cover you need in one place, we're like an uncle that doesn't give you bad advice. CG Atlantic. Good like that.
Around the world, Cleveland Clinic is recognized as a leader in healthcare. Our team of experts relentlessly pursues the best for our patients. From groundbreaking cancer research to state-of-the-art heart surgery, life-saving innovations happen here every day. When it's time to travel for your health, it's time to travel to Cleveland Clinic. Your destination for care, for every care in the world. To learn more, visit clevelandclinic.org/Caribbean.
The Access Accelerator Small Business Development Center is here to help small businesses throughout the entire Bahamas. To better serve you, we've made it easier to contact us. Call 461-7232, WhatsApp 359-0626 or 359-2394, email helpdesk@spdcbahamas.com, or submit a ticket when you visit our help center at accessaccelerator.org. The Access Accelerator, empowering small business.
This is Guardian Radio, your station for up-to-the-minute news, intelligent, interactive, and engaging conversation. 96.9 FM. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Political Review. My name is Quincy Parker. I'm your host. And today we are talking with our special guest, Alicia Wallace of Equality Bahamas. Alicia is in Kigali, Rwanda, where she participated in the Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings. And she is giving us her feedback from those, some of the sessions that she attended. And it is, I sort of interrupted your last sort of statement, Alicia, to take the top of the hour break. If you wanted to finish your thought from before we took the break.
Yes, I was just giving an example of how equality is connected to these thematic areas that we look at, like climate, like health. So I was talking about the need for sexual and reproductive health services and access to contraceptives in situations of climate disaster, the aftermath of disaster, because people want to be able to prevent pregnancy as well as any STIs in that particular situation. So we can't really divorce these thematic areas. Equality requires us to think about these particular groups of people and their specific experiences and the risks that they face and the differences in access to opportunities, and that equality is about ensuring that people have the same outcome. So we don't necessarily do the same thing for everyone, but we want to ensure that there's equality in outcome.
Speaking of which, under the Kigali Declaration on Child Care and Protection Reform, the Commonwealth heads made a number of commitments, a number of undertakings. And I want to go through some of them, but just by way of context, as I read these, I guess I wanted to sort of ask, in terms of sort of placing some of these concerns in a broader context of what it is we're talking about. How does child care and child protection where does it fall in this whole discussion?
I think it comes up because there's so much focus on the future. And it's been a common theme over the past few months, particularly as there have been rulings or decisions made by UN bodies that acknowledge that the protection of children is the environment is a human right, and connecting that to children, connecting that to young people, and what then this generation and the generations that follow will inherit and what they will have to deal with in the future. And so it seems to be sort of a wave of focus on children in particular and thinking about them as a specific group that needs to be attended to. So that declaration looks at children with disabilities, it looks at health issues, it looks at children who are in various different vulnerable situations and the kinds of services and support that they need. Recognizing, again, as I said earlier, that this is a particular group of people that needs attention in certain ways. And so this declaration looks at some of them and recognizes, I think that's the language that these conventions often use. They recognize something, they affirm something. And the part that I think is always missing is this, and you see this and you acknowledge this. So what? What are you going to do? What are states going to do? What is the Commonwealth going to do, having recognized these things?
It's almost like you read their minds, right? So having come to all of those recognitions and making all those affirmations, the heads undertake to take appropriate measures to strengthen health systems for future pandemics and ensure adequate response to the needs of all children and young people. They undertake to expand social protection coverage, to reduce poverty and promote human capital for all children and young people, and to strengthen social protection systems to better respond to future shocks. They undertake to tackle the underlying causes that lead to children requiring care and protection. They undertake to tackle the underlying causes of the separation of children from their families and communities, including by progressively replacing institutionalization with quality alternative care across the Commonwealth. They undertake to put in place necessary to ensure sustainable and effective child protection and safeguarding systems for care and protection of all children, including the elimination of child labor in all its forms, forced labor, trafficking, and sexual exploitation. They undertake to implement a policy of zero tolerance. Undertake a policy of zero tolerance for violence, harassment, abuse, stigma, or discrimination, paying particular attention to the most marginalized and excluded children and those in a situation of vulnerability, and to encourage development agencies by the year 2025 to support staff as well as applicants and recipients of aid, development assistance, and investment to prioritize quality care arrangements at the community level, including for children with disabilities, to support projects that take a holistic and inclusive approach in systems development and family strengthening, to provide clear information on how funding supports families and family-based systems of care, to amplify and support the voices of children and their families, including the underrepresented voices of girls, children with disabilities, and other marginalized groups, and support the meaningful participation in society of children, young people, their families, and their representative groups, and to support inclusive, accessible, quality community services, including all aspects of education, health, and social services that meet the diverse requirements of children and their families, and support the choice, dignity, autonomy, and full participation of all children and their families in society, including the most marginalized. And they have a couple of other undertakings, but those ones I think are the most pertinent to our discussion today. And so I put to you that children are in the Bahamas definitely a marginalized group. They don't rate, and I'm making this a statement rather than a question, and I wish for you to challenge me if you think I'm wrong. But I don't think children rate any consideration whatsoever in our policy and in our national discussions. It's almost as if we believe as a matter of policy that children should be seen and not heard, and really they shouldn't even be seen. Do you think that I am wrong? Have I overstated the case?
I do not disagree at all.
What do we do about that? How do we come to a different outcome?
I think you have to start by seeing children as people. I don't think that most people do. I don't think most people recognize children as people. You know, they're not supposed to, like you said, be seen or heard. They're not supposed to speak unless spoken to. They're supposed to be little robots that just take inputs, right? You just take instructions and you follow them, and that's it. They're not even supposed to feel. They're not supposed to have any emotions. Crying's not okay. Complaining isn't okay. Screaming isn't okay. But adults can do and do engage in all of these things, appropriate and inappropriate. So I think we have to start there, that children are full human beings. Yes, they are growing, they are learning, they are being trained, they're being prepared for adulthood. but the children also have rights. And I don't think there's anyone who is really promoting the rights of children. I don't hear people really talk about the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And that's something that should be discussed and something that should be shared with children. It should be a part of the curriculum so that they recognize people as human beings and as rights holders as well.
So given what you have experienced in Kigali this last couple of days, with regard to trying to make some sort of change and progress in Bahamian policy context, what do you think we need to do to effect the kind of change that we need? But before that, why don't you identify the goal first? Tell me how we win, and then tell me how we get there.
So, I'm sorry, I think my connection dipped a little bit. Maybe the last two things. You want me to tell you?
Sure. Right. So, tell me how we win. Right? When you look, let's say you look down the road, you pick a number of years, and you say, okay, finally we got here. Describe the promised land, and then based on everything that you've experienced and run across this week, and all of the inputs that you've had, and all of the discussions that you've been a part of, and all of the solutions that have been bruited about, how do we get to the promised land? But I want to know what you think the promised land is first.
The promised land is an equitable world, equitable society where we all have all of our needs are being met. And, human rights are a given. It's like, of course, it's like you need water, you need food. Sure, human rights, obviously. And getting there, that's the question, eh? I think it takes integrating that into our education system.
Mm-hmm.
And for the younger generations, but also having these conversations at the national level, bringing it to people wherever people are. So I think one of the mistakes that we continue to make is putting out this information in the newspaper, perhaps on the television and radio news, maybe having conversations on radio talk shows, maybe a little bit on social media. All of that is great, but we're still not reaching everyone because there are lots of people who do not watch the news. We have a lot of people who don't have the internet at home. Maybe they just have data and they ain't using their data to watch no news all day, or to scroll things that are not fun. People spend most of their time at work, and I think we are underutilizing the workspace. We should really be having a lot of conversations, providing a lot of information and opportunities to engage at work. Having lunch and learns, engaging employers and showing employers how beneficial it is to have a staff that is politically astute, that cares about each other, that cares about society, and that is able to contribute to what we want. Because I don't think we're going to get to that place of equity with just 10 billion people sitting around the table making all of the decisions. Everyone has to be involved, and we need to figure out how we do that. And we cannot have everyone involved if there are people who have to work 3 jobs to keep food on the table and get children to school. They're not going to come to the town hall meeting. So we have to reach them at work. That's where they're spending all their time. I think that's the shift that we need to make in our activism, in our advocacy, in our policy making right now. Just radical inclusion, figuring out ways to get as many people engaged as possible. And again, we talked about this earlier, recognizing that there are different groups of people that are having different experiences and have different needs. We can't treat it as though we just do one thing and we'll catch everyone, because it just doesn't work that way. We have to think about the people who are the worst off and how we help them, how we bring them up. And it's not just about not leaving them behind. It's about not leaving them any worse off with the policy decisions and the changes in constitution and legislation that we make. We have to constantly be thinking about the consequences, including the unintended consequences of what we put forward. So we need to be looking at women, we need to be looking at children, young people, migrant people, people with disabilities, older people has been drilled into my head over the past few days. People who are institutionalized need to be engaged in these conversations. I really think it's about meaningful engagement. It's about consultation, and not the kind where decisions are made and then you ask some people a few questions and just check that box and say, yep, we talked to some community members, involving them in and then co-creating solutions. When you co-create solutions, you get so many different perspectives, so many more ideas, and then you have built-in buy-in, because when people participate in something, they care about it more, and they're more prepared to promote it, agree to it, etc.
I like this recognition that you got to catch people at work. I mean, that is 179% true. So I'm guessing then that we'll be seeing a lot more lunch and learns from Equality Bahamas going forward.
Yeah, we're going to be knocking on employers' doors to get this done. One of the things that we've been working on over the past, I guess, year and a half now, as a part of the Global 16 Days campaign, is in the International Labour Organization, or ILO's Convention 190, which is on eliminating violence and harassment in the world of work. And we had not previously been doing a whole lot of work in the labor space, but I think our whole team is just so impressed with this convention, because it recognizes that people spend all this time at work, but also it talks about the world of work, not just the workplace. And the world of work includes so much more than, the office that you might go to. It includes your transportation to and from work. It includes the hotel that your employer puts you up in when you have to travel for work, when you have to attend a conference. It includes technology that you have to use to do your job. And it obligates the employer, it obligates the state to protect people in the world of work. So that is to engage more with the private sector. And now we're trying to figure out how we can get in touch with more human resource professionals and figure out how we can swoop in and do these lunch and learns and talk about a lot of these issues. C190, of course, is going to be, I think, of interest to people, especially we've seen in the news over the past few years that a lot of people are being stalked, at work because of their work, because they're public figures. And we know that a lot of domestic violence happens at work because it is the obvious place to find the victim. They're going to show up at work. So these are some of the conversations that we're having, and the workplace, the private sector is now a target for Equality Bahamas, most definitely.
Yeah. There are issues that I think are universal, obviously. And then there are things that are particularly unique to the circumstances of a particular community, a specific community. Obviously, the world, is discussing those things that we all have in common, and you would have discussed a number of those things at the Commonwealth Women's Forum or the Commonwealth People's Forum. I'm going to ask you about this roundtable with the Ministers of Foreign Affairs in a minute, but it occurs to me that I'm curious whether or not you think that there are any issues that are in this space.
I don't know that nothing really comes to mind as being completely unique. I think one of the challenges that I have certainly seen is difficulty in getting funding. I think that is with NGOs, and I think it's the case with government as well, because of our GDP. We're locked out of a lot of funding, a lot of opportunities. Those numbers tell a different story from what we experience as reality. And it makes it very difficult to do the work that we need to do. I think other countries in the Caribbean have challenges for sure, because they have lower GDPs, because of the debt crisis that many of us are in. But most of them are in different income categories and have access to different things. But it was raised in the conversations about climate and health at the People's Forum. And I believe it was Dr. Jimmy Fletcher from St. Lucia, who is he's a leading expert on climate change. He talked about the fact that climate change, well, actually, I think he said we need to move away from using climate change and talk about climate crisis, because it's not something that's in the future. It's happening now, and it's happening to us. And vulnerable states, we're small island states, we are not contributing, I think it must be like 0.2% or something, to climate change. And the countries that are really emitting, the ones that are creating or feeding this crisis, are causing us to experience these impacts. And then when we need help, when we need assistance with recovery, when we need, right now, what we need is adaptation and mitigation, they say, sure, you can get some funding, but it'll be a loan. So we end up borrowing money and having to pay interest to the countries that caused us to be in crisis. That's an interesting position to be in. It's a tough position to be in. And to get out of it, we have to be prepared to work with other countries who are in similar situations, whether we consider them to be worse off or better off. We need to work together. We need to be working with CARICOM. We need to be pushing CARICOM to do more on this. We need to be pushing the Commonwealth to do more on this, because the Commonwealth, when you go to any Commonwealth meeting, they always talk about Commonwealth is that we're so many different countries and we're so different, and we have big countries, we have small countries. Well, great. So get the big countries to contribute in, proportionately to their contributions to crisis and proportionately to the resources that they have, and give to the islands that don't, or the countries that don't have as much.
I'm working on a show about reparations, talking about Jean-Bertrand Aristide. When he first started talking about reparations, it was in the context of calculating that France made Haiti pay what is amounted to billions of dollars to not renew their attempt to colonize that country. So they were free. They took resources out of Haiti, and then tried to make Haiti pay to get their own resources back, billions of dollars. So it's the question of reparations there is, well, that's what you owe us, right? But in the context of what you're saying now, there just seems to be an attitude of the rich nations, the industrialized nations, that might makes right. Right? And if we live in a world where might makes right, how do we, what leverage do we have as, what do you call it, big ocean countries? What leverage do we have as economies when our economies contribute less than 1% to the world GDP? It's not a rhetorical question.
Yeah, I think that is, or that should be, the power of these multilateral organizations. That is where we're supposed to be leveraging our position in CARICOM, in the Commonwealth. So you look at the Commonwealth, for example, where there is the Commonwealth Charter. So all the states not only agreed to it, but they wrote it together. And it's all we the people, this, that, affirming, recalling, all this stuff. And then there are 16 core values and principles, I think they're referred to as. And they include the usual suspects: democracy, human rights, freedom of expression. We had a really great conversation about freedom of expression at the People's Forum, rule of law, good governance. And then when you really get down to it, I think the last couple are recognition of the needs of small states, and then recognition of the needs of vulnerable states. And my issue with the charter is that it's recognizing these things, and it's saying that, yeah, we need to assist these developing states, and especially look at SIDS, small island developing states, help them with climate change and energy and all this stuff so that they're ready for the future. And then on recognition of the needs of vulnerable states, it's something similar. We're going to help the states with the least amount of money and the most vulnerability to ensure that we can protect vulnerable people. But it doesn't get into the how. Still, when crises come up, when these needs are identified, states like SIDS, like big ocean nations, should go to these Commonwealth meetings and say, hey, remember the charter? Remember how we committed to these principles? Well, now is the time to action it, because we, 5 countries in the Caribbean, experienced storms over the past 2 years, and this is the debt that we are in to various countries, and this many states are in the Commonwealth. We need debt forgiveness. And leverage that space. Call on the principles, call people out on the commitments that they've made, and demand that they deliver. That's what these spaces are for, in part.
Mm-hmm. So now we come to it. You were a part of a forum, a meeting with foreign ministers?
Yes.
How much cursing was there?
There was none. Everyone was very polite. People put forward their asks. There were some questions. We got some answers. It was civil society was very civil, and governments were very governmenty, as usual. But there were summarized a few of the key points that were coming out of the 2 days of meetings in the first portion, and then we were joined by the Commonwealth associated organizations. So you have the Commonwealth Secretariat, you have the Commonwealth Foundation, which is sort of the civil society arm, the Commonwealth Learning Network, and a couple of organizations that presented on what they've been doing and what they got out of these pre-CHOGM and CHOGM events. And there was opportunity again to have a dialogue between civil society and the foreign ministers or representatives that they sent. So in many cases, it wasn't actually the foreign minister representing the states. But of course, everyone didn't get to speak. It was in 54 countries getting up to make presentations. I think the whole event was maybe 3 hours long. But there was space for some kind of offside conversations, which was quite useful. And I think the thing that everyone walked away with was that I think there's a lot of questioning about this word Commonwealth. What does it mean? We tend to divide it into common and wealth, and the wealth is not common, and common means we have so much in common and we the people, and all the kind of usual stuff. But people want to know where we go from here, how we actually transform the Commonwealth and the relationship that we have. Most of us sharing the history of colonization, not all of us. Like Rwanda is a new member of the Commonwealth that has not had that history of British colonization anyway. But it was really about remembering the people, and both forums, I think really a lot in the women's forum as well, that those of us who attend these meetings, we have a certain amount of privilege, and it's easy to get sort of self-important and be the voice of the people, but can you really be the voice of all of the people? And when you're in these spaces, do you remember the people on the ground who are not here? Are we speaking a language that they understand? Are we really bringing their concerns? And when we go back home, what is our responsibility? How do we report back to them about what we've discussed, what we've heard, the commitments that have been made, and figuring out how we actually hold states and the Commonwealth itself accountable? Because the one thing that we agreed to is that there needs to be some sort of transformation. And in the panel that I was on about where we go from here and how we have a Commonwealth for all, I did bring up reparations, and I connected it to the climate crisis, and I connected it to the discriminatory laws that all of us are struggling with, that all of us are working on some level to reform, and recognizing that reparations isn't about writing a check to every single descendant of an enslaved person. It's about making a repair. And in many cases, that repair is technical assistance. It is doing whatever it takes to assist governments in making the legislative change that will move us toward equality. It means holding states accountable for their contributions to the climate crisis, and making sure that those of us who are on the receiving end of disaster have what we need, not only to recover, but to prevent some of that from happening again, and protecting ourselves from future events that we know at this point are inevitable.
Did you get that? Okay. So when I was in the diplomatic corps, I started in 2009. One of the first things that my then ambassador told me about the Organization of American States was that it was what he called a quote unquote talk shop, where what is said is often more important than what is done, because a lot gets said, but relatively little action comes out of all of the talk, right?
Yeah.
And so you have this sense of these multinational organizations, that the ones that are not focused on funding are perhaps just places for profiling, profiling in the party, as Synovia Pierre would say. And not necessarily places where real decisions get made that are then turned into actions that can be measured and that states can be held accountable for. So having slogged through CHOGM, do you feel like this was an exercise in patting ourselves on the back? Was anything real? Will anything change? Will anything happen 3-4 days of meetings?
Yeah, I the talk shops are exhausting. And but most of these meetings are talk shops, or they at least start that way. You have to figure out how to turn it into more. I think one of the most useful things about these kinds of meetings is actually being able to engage with people and having bilateral conversations and finding room for collaboration and for peer learning. That's really, to me, that's where a lot of the value is. Um, in terms of moving from being just a conversation to action, that's the thing that I was really pushing for. So a part of the conversation happening at the People's Forum was about the Commonwealth Charter. And the question was asked, is the Commonwealth Charter still relevant? Do we need a new charter? If we do, what needs to be in it? And my position was that the charter is still relevant. We still haven't really committed to these principles. What we need now is an action plan. If we really committed to these principles, what does that mean? Similar to the question that you asked me, what does it look like when we win and how do we get there? That's the thing that we need to chart from this charter. And I'm hoping that some of that comes out of these forums and the meetings, the CHOGM itself, that there is some of the how-to coming out of it, and that these conversations are continued. And again, a lot of it is dependent on the people who are in the room. That includes civil society, that includes Commonwealth institutions, and of course that includes states, members of the delegation that are present. The responsibility is on all of us to let people at home know the key points that were made, what were the conversations, what were the commitments that were made, and what do we do going forward. And that might not be a prescriptive thing. It might not be that you come home and you say, these are the things we're going to do. You might say, these were the conversations, these were the questions, this is what we got out of it. And maybe create a space for people to contribute to that plan of action. Because I think you go off to meetings, you have the talks, it's exhausting, you do it for days and days. You get home and you're like, well, back to checking my emails. But there has to be time carved out for building on what happened in that space, and also reconnecting with, in an intentional manner, the people that you met, and the tapping into the potential of those connections that are made and the agreements that are made and the possibilities that are identified while you were still in that space. It's the follow-up that's lacking. I think in general, there's nothing wrong with having the conversations. You could have a talk shop, but action it, move it forward.
Yeah, the talking is great, but it's what happens after the last person has given their speech
exactly.
That I want to, because I feel like, especially a country like the Bahamas, right? We have a reputation as these great tourism, this, that, and the next, and we're all wonderful about with regard to our leadership in certain things. But the reality is, we're really still very much, in my view, a third world country. We have, with unfortunate regularity, right? We have no ability to insulate ourselves from the exogenous shocks of a war that has escalated both food and fuel prices around the world. We are vulnerable in an incredibly, we're an open economy. There are no walls. There's no protection. And so what are we left to do to protect ourselves? How do we protect ourselves? And the question, my question is, what are we trying to get at as a country when the whole world is only interested in talking, You know, we finished talking, man. You know, talking is cute, but you know, come on, man. Let's be done with the talk. What are we gonna do? What are we actually gonna do? And I guess so. I guess what I'm asking is, you know, given what are we gonna do coming out of CHOGM? That what is going to happen coming out of CHOGM that is going to benefit the Commonwealth of the Bahamas? In your view, is there anything that we as a country can look forward to?
I'm coming out of CHOGM. I have hopes. I have things that I would like to see happen. I would like to see the Bahamian government engage in conversations about reparations. I would like to see every minister familiarize themselves with the CARICOM 10-point plan for reparatory justice, for them to meaningfully engage the Bahamas National Reparations Committee. Because there are, I mean, the plan, the points of this plan are solid. They are critical for us. One of them is focused solely on the public health crisis and recognizing that we in the region have the highest incidence of a number of chronic diseases, including diabetes and hypertension. So there's a responsibility to address this health disaster, and the responsibility should not be ours. There is also a focus on debt cancellation, important for very obvious reasons. And if we're serious about healthcare, which the government says it is, and if we're serious about getting out of debt and being able to actually invest in a future and not just paying off the past, then we need to be engaged in this process. We can't just sit on the sidelines, and we can't just abstain and then expect to benefit at the end of the day. And we also need to raise this issue at the Commonwealth level and about their responsibilities. I would like to see the Bahamian government take the lead on that, because I think we just opt out. We opt out of these conversations. We opt out of a lot of the actions that are being taken, being led by regional brothers and sisters, and then expect things to happen or to be included in the benefits if there are to be any benefits. And we need to step it up. We need to step it up in a very big way. And refusing to talk about reparations and turning up the nose at the word will not get us where we need to be.
So the next, and I guess sort of the last question or the last set of questions is around this issue, this question that you bring up of we almost have sort of an isolationist stance. You know, the Bahamas, for all of our touting of our membership in CARICOM, we really sort of approach the world alone. And I think that there is if you look at our politics, there is a sort of a myopia. It's it's a myopia that is very, I think it's very self-serving, right? That we only are interested politically in issues that affect voters today. And even they're only interested politically in the issues that affect voters who make noise today. It's the squeaky wheel that gets the oil.
And I wonder whether or not you think our government structure is up to the challenge of dealing with all of these issues that some of which may not necessarily make the headlines, right? Some of which may not get you a front page story in the daily newspaper. Especially not if the daily newspaper is committed to if it bleeds, it leads, right? Do we have political parties, and this is a judgment call, where you have the PLP and the FNM who are trading the government back and forth? Do you believe that either party is able to deal with anything beyond just the myopic issue of the day? And that has to be my last question because I got to go pick up my daughter, and the rain is starting to come down, so I may have to end the show early a little bit today.
Okay. Is it capable? I don't know if I'm prepared to make that judgment call, but I am pretty sure that it does not care to. I don't see the commitment to the country as a whole. I don't see the interest in the people, and I don't see the effort engaging the people, truly engaging the people, not pandering, not showing up with the Mother's Day rose and the Father's Day cards, being at funerals. I mean, true engagement. Members of Parliament, representatives, talking to the people and finding out how can I represent you? What are your views? And I'm going to take them back and be your representative and present them when I get on my feet. So when I say I stand, on behalf of the people of da-da-da, that's really what I'm doing. I don't see that happening. I don't see our cabinet ministers really taking an active role in leading ministries and in really performing any kind of diagnosis on what's going on, aside from complaining about everything the previous administration did. And I'm not just talking about this administration. I mean, every single one. They get in and they spend the first year or two just complaining about everything and going over everything, whether or not that's necessary. I don't see the commitment. And I truly believe that they are more interested in their own careers. They're interested in the longevity of their political careers. And we need to figure out a way to change the system so that there is some measure and there is some consequence for not doing the job, which is the job is not to keep your job. The job is not to get reelected by doing nothing and keeping the people who benefit from that in positions of power. The job is to transform and to bring us to that promise that everybody wants. Well, not everybody wants, but most of us want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and isn't that the thing, right? It's that we're talking about equitability, and the fact is that not everybody wants equal, right? Some people like living in a country where some of us are more equal than others, where some of us have advantages that others don't, and you hear it. Well, anyway, I ain't get in trouble, but you have been in a forum for the last few days where the world, the Commonwealth has gathered to examine issues that we face in common. And our challenge with our local politics is that we often
seeing to face these issues or try to face these issues alone, unless it's something that is so big that we give up on trying to do anything ourselves and just we run to the international arena to say, hey, y'all got to help us out. So, my last question is I guess it's a simple one, but it is a cry. In French, they call it a cri de corps. What the hell do we do? How do we win? I mean, how do we win? And given what you've heard and seen at Chogam, can we win? Give me some hope, Ms. Wallace.
Oh dear, that's definitely not what I was going to say until you said give you hope. I wasn't going to say anything hopeful.
Well, I mean, I'd rather have the truth then. Let's go with that.
I don't think that our current system is built for that. We need transformation. We need to do something new. We really need to shake things up. And I'm sure that you remember the Out the Box campaign. I think that it remains important. It remains relevant. It's probably one of my favorite things I've ever participated in, because I still believe in the tenets of that and the idea that the current political system, the electoral system, does not work for us. It benefits a few, and so they keep it there, but we need campaign finance reform. We need to deal with this issue of corruption. We need transparency and accountability. We need to have a say in who the candidates are. We need to be able to say, nope, none of these candidates work. And we need to be able to participate in the process of putting together these 5-year plans that are being called, charters and manifestos. That they shouldn't just be done behind closed doors and then presented to us for us to choose between. We need to get beyond this lesser of two evils thing. And we need to have real representation. We need cabinet ministers who actually know what they're doing, and to be able to recruit and retain experts at the director level within the departments in these ministries to actually keep things going, to train staff, to develop plans and then to execute those plans. We need the people who are attending these meetings to know what people are talking about, what they're talking about, and be able to come back home and implement. We need people who can work as members of teams, put their ego aside, and put country first.
All right.
That's
And that,
all we have.
Yeah, put country first. What a wonderful thing to say. Alicia Wallace, thank you very much for joining us from Kigali, Rwanda. And we appreciate your time. And you're 6 hours ahead, so you probably should be sleeping now, huh?
I should, but I will be soon.
All right. Well, good night, and thank
Thank
you
you for having me.
All right. And that's going to do it for us here this week, folks. Thank you for joining us live on the Political Review. God bless, and we'll see you next week.